Mexico is not a country, it is a living memory. It is the thunder beneath volcanoes, the breath of gods carried on desert winds, the rhythm of drums echoing from ancient pyramids. It is both empire and rebellion. It is the blood of warriors and the ink of poets. From its tangled roots of indigenous civilizations to the arrival of European conquest, from revolution to Renaissance, Mexico is a story of endless rebirth, each chapter written in fire, stone, and soul. This land, so often romanticized, misunderstood, or simplified, is home to some of the greatest civilizations in human history. Long before Europe discovered the New World, Mexico had cities larger than London, calendars more precise than Rome, and philosophies as rich as Athens. This is the home of the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, the Maya, and the Mexica, a people the world would later call the Aztecs. It is a story of balance between gods and mortals, between nature and civilization, between power and resistance. It is a story of conquest, not just by the Spanish, but by emperors and insurgents, generals and priests, presidents and peasants. It is a land where temples became churches, where empires collapsed into dust, and where revolutions were born in silence and fire. And yet, through it all, through collapse, colonization, and chaos, Mexico endures. It endures not because it forgets, but because it remembers. In its music, in its murals, in its marketplaces and mountains, the past is never far. This is not just the story of a country, it is the story of a people who refused to vanish. This is the history of Mexico. Long before the name Mexico existed, this land was home to civilizations that rivaled the wonders of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. It was here, on these vast plateaus and lush valleys, that humanity carved out knowledge, power, and beauty that would echo across millennia. The story begins with the Olmecs, often called the mother civilization of Mesoamerica. Flourishing as early as 1200 BC, they laid the foundations of art, architecture, and religion that others would inherit. Their colossal stone heads, each weighing several tons, still gaze across the jungles of Veracruz, their silent eyes a reminder that even the mightiest civilizations can vanish, leaving behind only questions. Centuries later, the Maya built their shining cities in the dense rainforests of the Yucatan. They were visionaries, astronomers who mapped the heavens with uncanny precision, mathematicians who developed the concept of zero, and architects whose pyramids still rise majestically from the jungle canopy. Their cities, Tikal, Palenque, Chichen Itza, were both centers of faith and stages for power. And though their political structures eventually collapsed, their descendants endure, preserving language and tradition to this day. Then, from the swamps of Lake Texcoco, rose the Aztecs. In 1325, legend says they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent, a vision that would mark the place where they built Tenochtitlan. What began as a humble settlement grew into a city of wonders, with temples that towered over vast markets, canals that rivaled Venice, and a population larger than most European capitals of the time. To those who first saw it, Tenochtitlan seemed less a city and more a vision, glittering in the sun like a dream made real. But the Aztecs ruled not only with grandeur, but with fear. Their empire stretched across much of Mesoamerica, built through conquest and tribute, sustained by the blood of sacrifice. And while their gods demanded offerings, their people built a society of remarkable order, art, and ambition. Yet even the greatest empires are not eternal. Beyond the horizon, sails were approaching, and with them came a force that would forever change the destiny of Mexico. The year was 1519. Across the Gulf of Mexico, strange sails appeared on the horizon. They carried Hernán Cortés and a few hundred Spanish conquistadors, men driven by ambition, faith, and the promise of gold. What they found was a land of glittering cities and mighty empires beyond anything they had imagined. Cortés marched inland, forging uneasy alliances with tribes oppressed by Aztec rule. To some, he was a liberator, to others, an omen of destruction. As the Spaniards approached Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II received them with caution and awe. The meeting of two worlds, one ancient, one new, was tense, delicate, and doomed from the start. The Spaniards possessed steel swords, cannons, and horses, weapons the Aztecs had never seen. But their deadliest ally was invisible: smallpox. The disease swept through Tenochtitlan like wildfire, killing thousands and weakening an empire that had stood for centuries. In 1521, after months of siege, the mighty city fell. Temples crumbled, streets ran red, and the once great Tenochtitlan was reduced to ruins. Upon its ashes, the Spanish built Mexico City, declaring it the heart of a vast new colony, New Spain. With conquest came conversion. Catholic missionaries spread Christianity, and the Virgin of Guadalupe emerged as a powerful symbol, blending Spanish devotion with indigenous faith. To many, she represented hope, unity, and survival in a world that had been violently transformed. But beneath the soaring cathedrals and ornate palaces, pain lingered. Indigenous peoples were forced into labor under the encomienda system. Their traditions were suppressed, their gods erased from temples. African slaves were shipped across the Atlantic to toil alongside them, weaving yet another thread into Mexico's complex identity. The conquest was not simply the fall of an empire, it was the birth of a new world, a world of blending and conflict, where Spanish and indigenous cultures clashed, merged, and forged a new identity. Out of blood and ashes, a new Mexico was beginning to take shape. For the next 3 centuries, Mexico existed not as a nation, but as New Spain, the crown jewel of the Spanish Empire in the Americas. Its mines glittered with silver, its fields yielded crops, and its ports connected Europe with Asia through the Manila galleons. To the outside world, New Spain looked like a land of endless wealth. But beneath the surface lay a society built on deep divisions and heavy chains. At the very top were the Peninsulares, Spaniards born in Europe. They held the highest offices and enjoyed the greatest privileges. Below them stood the Criollos, Spaniards born in Mexico. Though wealthy and educated, they were denied the same power as those born in Spain, fueling resentment that would one day erupt. Below them were the vast majority, mestizos, people of mixed Spanish and indigenous blood, indigenous communities forced into labor on haciendas and mines, and African slaves whose toils were erased from the grand portraits of the colonial elite. Together they carried the weight of the empire while reaping little of its rewards. Yet culture thrived even in oppression. Spanish and indigenous traditions intertwined in food, language, art, and faith. The Virgin of Guadalupe became not just a religious figure, but a symbol of identity, embodying the resilience of a people who refused to vanish. By the late 1700s, winds of change swept through the world. The Enlightenment questioned old hierarchies. Across the Atlantic, the American colonies won independence. The French Revolution toppled kings. And within Latin America, whispers of liberty began to spread like wildfire. In 1810, those whispers erupted into a roar. In the small town of Dolores, a humble priest named Miguel Hidalgo rang the church bell and issued the Grito de Dolores, calling his people to rise. Thousands answered, rallying under the banner of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Farmers, laborers, and mestizos marched together, determined to claim the freedom denied to them for centuries. The struggle was long and brutal. Armies clashed, towns burned, and leaders were executed. But the fire of rebellion could not be extinguished, and in 1821, after more than a decade of bloodshed, Mexico at last broke free from Spain's grasp. Yet independence was only the beginning. The chains were gone, but the question remained: what kind of nation would Mexico become? Independence had been won, but unity was far harder to achieve. The young nation of Mexico, born in sacrifice, quickly found itself fractured. Its leaders could not agree on what kind of country to build. Should Mexico be a monarchy or a republic? Centralized or federal? Each vision clashed violently, plunging the nation into political chaos. The 19th century became an age of turmoil. In 1836, the province of Texas declared independence after fierce battles like the Alamo. Only a decade later, Mexico faced its most devastating trial: war with the United States. Outnumbered and outgunned, Mexico fought with determination, but could not withstand the American advance. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo forced Mexico to surrender nearly half its territory, including what would become California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. The loss was staggering. Mexico had won its freedom, only to see its land carved away. Yet even as it grieved, new dangers loomed. In the 1860s, French troops invaded, exploiting Mexico's weakness. They placed a foreign noble, Maximilian of Habsburg, on the throne as emperor. For a moment, it seemed Mexico might once again fall under foreign rule. But the spirit of resistance burned bright. Under the leadership of Benito Juárez, Mexico fought back. At the Battle of Puebla in 1862, Mexican forces achieved an unlikely victory over the French, a triumph still celebrated today as Cinco de Mayo. Eventually, Maximilian's empire collapsed, and Mexico reclaimed its sovereignty. Yet stability remained elusive. By the late 1800s, a soldier named Porfirio Diaz rose to power. He would rule for more than 30 years in an era known as the Porfiriato. Railroads stretched across the land, cities grew, and foreign investment flowed in. To the outside world, Mexico appeared modern and prosperous, but progress came at a heavy cost. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of the few, while peasants and workers remained trapped in poverty. Freedom was sacrificed for order. Beneath the shining railways and grand boulevards, unrest simmered, a storm building on the horizon. Mexico had survived foreign invasion and territorial loss, but the greatest upheaval was yet to come. By 1910, Mexico was a land divided. To the outside world, the long rule of Porfirio Diaz looked like a golden age. Railways stretched across the country, factories buzzed with industry, and cities glittered with wealth. But beneath the polished surface lay a harsher truth. Prosperity was reserved for the elite, while millions of peasants, laborers, and indigenous families lived in poverty. The spark came when Francisco I Madero, a wealthy reformer with a vision of democracy, challenged Diaz's grip on power. When Diaz rigged the election to stay in office, the country erupted. The call for freedom could no longer be silenced. Out of the chaos rose figures who would become legends. In the South, Emiliano Zapata rallied peasants under the cry of Tierra y Libertad, land and liberty. His dream was simple yet radical. Give the land back to those who worked it. In the North, Pancho Villa, a former bandit turned revolutionary, became a folk hero, leading cavalry raids that electrified the poor and terrified the powerful. The revolution raged for a decade. Alliances shifted like desert sands. Victories turned to betrayals. Leaders were assassinated, and countless ordinary men and women gave their lives in the struggle. Cities burned, the countryside bled, and the nation teetered on the edge of collapse. But from this storm, something new was forged. In 1917, a new constitution was written, one of the most progressive of its time. It promised land reform, workers' rights, and restrictions on the power of the Catholic Church. It was a vision of a fairer Mexico, born from sacrifice and fire. Yet the revolution did not solve every problem. Poverty, corruption, and inequality lingered, but it gave the people a voice and an unshakable belief that Mexico belonged to Mexicans, not to tyrants or foreign powers. The revolution had reshaped the nation, but now came the challenge of building a Mexico worthy of its sacrifices. The revolution had ended, but its echoes still rumbled through every village and city street. Mexico emerged scarred yet determined, carrying the weight of 1 million sacrifices and the hope of a brighter tomorrow. The 20th century was an age of rebuilding. Land reforms began to dismantle the vast estates of the Porfiriato, redistributing fields to those who had fought for them. The government sought to fulfill the promises of the revolution, though progress came slowly and unevenly. A new cultural identity also took root. Murals painted by giants like Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros turned the walls of schools and government buildings into vast canvases, telling the story of the people, not kings or generals, but farmers, workers, and revolutionaries. Their art reminded Mexicans that this was a nation built from the struggles of the common man. Mexican cinema and music thrived, earning international acclaim. The ranchera ballads of the countryside echoed in urban theaters, while literature and poetry carried the voices of a proud and diverse people. Mexico was not only rebuilding its institutions, it was reclaiming its soul. Yet the road forward was never smooth. Economic crises tested the nation. Corruption in politics bred frustration. The wounds of inequality, though less visible, still cut deep. And tragedies like the 1968 student massacre in Tlatelolco revealed how fragile freedom could be. Still, through each challenge, Mexico endured. The resilience of its people, the same resilience that had carried them through conquest, colonization, and revolution, propelled the nation forward. Today, Mexico stands as a land of contrasts and convergence. Ancient pyramids rise beside gleaming skyscrapers. Indigenous traditions live on in markets and villages, even as tech hubs hum with innovation. Over 120 million people call this land home, united by a shared history carved in both suffering and triumph. Mexico's story is not one of defeat, but of endurance. Time and again, it has been tested. It has risen. The journey is not over. For Mexico is not just a nation of the past, but a living story still being written with every generation.